Hey class, so this is week 6. We're going to be on a discussion of the Plateau native peoples, which does stretch up into Canada and into parts of kind of the northwestern Idaho, Montana, eastern Oregon region of the United States. I am in a classroom, so today I can kind of show you a little bit more in terms of how I teach on-site or traditional education, which is, there's a whiteboard here, which I will be drawing and kind of trying to connect some dots in a more, I guess, at least two-dimensional way rather than just me kind of talking about concepts. So the geography and environment, I've given you a map here. This is basically what the Plateau region looks like. And it's in between the coastal mountains, so the Cascade Range or the Northern Coast Range. And it is also in between the Rocky Mountains on the eastern side. So it is north of the Great Basin and on that kind of southern western region of Canada as well. Okay, so the three main rivers that are in this area are the Columbia, which is the largest one that was flooded frequently, the Fraser, and the Snake Rivers. Again, this region, very cold winters, very hot summers. Drastic, kind of like that subarctic temperature we talked about, but a little less drastic than that. There's a rain shadow effect, which means that the precipitation coming in from the coast is going to hit the coast and brings a lot of rain on the northwest coast. These groups in this plateau region are not going to have the same amount of precipitation. However, they get a lot of precipitation in the way of snowfall in the winter months. The northern area of the plateau region was mountainous with evergreen forest, pine, spruce, and fir. And then the southern region is more arid and dry, kind of high, I don't know, we might even call it desert, but it's not necessarily desert, but definitely less precipitation. You have sagebrush, lots of wind, this kind of area. Animals that the natives subsisted on are interesting. This is a pronghorn antelope. So deer, elk, moose, caribou, bear, sometimes bison, mountain sheep, pronghorn antelope, and salmon was the most important food stuff in terms of animal stuff. So you can see that we're starting to get into a different fauna and flora groupings based on kind of moving further south and a little bit more warmer temperatures as we move that direction. Your book points out also that grasshoppers and bugs were probably consumed. Most likely they were consumed. Again, a lot of native groups stop consuming bugs when Europeans show up and they are trying to impress them, and bugs are seen as below the Europeans to eat, so they start to change their ways. And we'll talk about timelines and what that contact looks like. Tubers, wild carrots, wild onions, pine nuts and acorns, berries, and cattails. Cattails tend to grow in marshes, and they were used for a bunch of different things. Cattails were one of the most utilitarian items in the New World, especially in these marshy areas. You could eat them. You can use them as pillow fluffing. You could use them as they use the reeds for different things like basketry. So very useful material and plant material. All right, so the history of this area is an interesting one, fascinating. Paleo-Indian Period is 14,000 to 10,000 years ago. There's not a lot of known variables in this time period. However, Kennewick Man is kind of in this time period. Kennewick Man, there was a big debate on whether or not he was Polynesian or where he came from. It turns out that basically he was a Native American ancestor and in this time period. In the beginning, early on in this area, people lived in small mobile groups, aka bands, and shifted to larger groups by 4,000 years ago, so that would be 2000 BCE, to more sedentary life in semi-permanent villages. Now, remember here that what's fascinating is book and author tend to still call these groups bands, even though they are more in permanent villages. Okay. The tough part is that usually we associate villages with tribes, okay, or even into chiefdoms. Now, or big men, right? This would be here too. Again, bands are hunter-gatherer foragers that move by definition, and they move seasonally. So once we get into villages, I would tend to maybe disagree with your author, and again, I think it's maybe for lack of a better term. Small groups, but villages. Now remember, once we move into permanent villages or permanent settlements, it changes the makeup of the group. And what we get here when we get into permanent villages is we get more of a division of labor. Okay? And what that means is we may now need a more political structure that leads to leadership or an individual or a group that has more to do with the village structure. Okay? And this structure, if we are moving around a lot, it is more about getting along, cooperating, and everybody having an equal status. So going further in terms of the book, remember that your author may use the word band for this, and really what they're talking about is number of people. Okay? And again, these things, and I've talked a lot about this, but this is kind of the most important in terms of political, socioeconomic structure of native groups and what we know about them and why they operate, and kind of our whole look into the past of human ancestry and how we organize ourselves. Now, remember, there's pretty much a certain level of spectrum here, right? And here we may have egalitarian, right, which also equals band level, okay? And egalitarian we can move to more, let's say, ascribed status leadership, right? And really what we get here is this is pretty much what we would call a chiefdom, okay? Here would be a big man or woman. And these are achieved, right? You become a big man through your prestige or value, okay? I don't know if you can even actually see that. Anyway, I'm talking. Egalitarian societies, and I'll bring the video closer to this when I kind of finish it up. Egalitarian bands might be here, but egalitarianism is on the spectrum, okay? And you may get tribal groups here. But in this period, or in this section here, we're getting ultimately a crossover between band and tribe in terms of numbers of people. Okay? But what we're also getting is a change in leadership in this process. So I will ultimately see how this works. So, again, we can move from band level societies, which tend to move and have equal status, okay, into tribe or villages, but we get a bigger division of labor in villages. Now, the spectrum that I'm trying to reiterate here is the egalitarian band level to tribe number of people, big men to chiefdom here, okay? Hopefully you guys got that. Anyway, this is my attempt at really flipping the classroom, as they say. And this is a very important kind of point here, right? Is that we can't just put everything in nice, cute categories because people are people and they organize themselves in different ways. However, what we can say is that usually when we moved around seasonally in small groups, 30 to, I'd say, 50 people maintains kind of this band and egalitarian society. Once we get over that, we're starting to move into semi-permanent villages and whatnot. All right? Another thing to keep in mind in this region is horses. And they were introduced in the 1720s. And we're going to have a long discussion this week about the horse and different anthropological theory based on the horse. Prior to the 1720 introduction, and in other places when we get into the plains conversation, prior to the horse, we're not sure actually how much people did have things like war, or how much people had things like slaves, and we'll have that conversation kind of later in the day. But just realize that the horse is also going to change. And remember, when we get into the Columbian Exchange, the horse is part of that, right? So 1500s all the way up to the 1700s, gradually wild horses make their way up north. Now remember, they came from domesticated stock originally, so it is not hard for the natives to domesticate them when they come up. Okay? All right, in terms of European contact and ethnographic data, first contact is 1805 with Americans, when Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea enter the area. Shortly after that, 30 years later, missionaries arrive. Missionaries, there is a contentious relationship between missionaries and the locals. The missionaries were not nice to the locals, at least in the historical record. They force converted. The natives ended up killing some of the missionaries because of this whole forced conversion. It was not a good relationship. But remember, missionaries are going to be in this area, similar to kind of the way that California and the Southwest also operate in the Spanish missions time. 1840, the Oregon Trail comes, or is formed. Now, when the Oregon Trail comes, the biggest issue is that now we have a huge influx of Europeans. And really we're talking about American Europeans, but also Europeans from Europe have been told that there is a western area that they can move into and have land. Okay. Out of that, we're getting a lot of diseases, like smallpox, malaria, scarlet fever, and measles. These are going to wipe out native groups. And again, up in the Arctic and subarctic, they were pretty protected because they were sparse. In these areas of the plateau, these people, there are way more of them, and the villages are closer together. So spreading disease was easier. Also, the season for spreading the disease was easier too. Now remember, in winter up in the subarctic and the Arctic, you are not going to go out and do a bunch of contact with other groups. Okay? So that would basically kill the season of, it would kill off kind of the diseases in that way. Now when you get lower and people continue to travel in these winter months, that's when you're going to keep these diseases kind of going. And fluctuating, actually, having higher kind of rates of disease. 1855, and again, the video that I have for this week is going to describe this in kind of more detail. 1855, the Walla Walla Council Treaty is created by the U.S. and these groups. They create a huge, massive kind of area for reservation, and the natives seemed pretty happy. Literally, a couple years later, if not that next year, gold is found in the area. And we have a bunch of white miners moving into the area, creates a lot of conflict, and ultimately creates the Indian War, Plateau Indian War conflict until 1858. So we have about a 3-year war. And again, the video I'm going to have you watch about the Nez Perce is part of that process. Remember, gold is a central theme when we talk about native peoples of North America. The Cherokee and the Trail of Tears in Georgia and Alabama and Florida area, that whole group, those Cherokee are going to be driven out because gold is found in that area as well, and then they're moved over to Oklahoma. Similar things happen in California during the gold rush as well. Okay, 1849. So again, we're seeing gold, Colorado, same kind of thing. We see gold being found and ultimately treaties being torn up or ignored, and then massive changes within these native groups. Okay? So with the Oregon Trail, after missionaries have arrived, we've got religious acculturation. Now we've gotten into miners acculturating, disease has taken over. And really one of the biggest issues is that we don't have anthropological studies until 1890s. Now again, we have first contact in 1805. This is 85 years of contact before anthropologists are able to go in and study that region and really tell us what these people were like. Okay? And all of that time period, these groups have changed because of the contact. Right? And again, this is an important fact when we're talking about the identity of these groups.